is a case of a patient who was 92 years old, and she was very vigilant and never had any problems. Then all of a sudden she did come in with dyspnea. Nothing very spectacular, and as you will see, I'm not going to show you something that you've never seen before, but I want to go through this case to show you how I would interpret these findings. Okay? Now, when I start out, I always start out with a parasternal long axis view. This is such a view, and this gives me just so much information already. You know, with just one glance, I can exclude that the patient has aortic stenosis, mitral stenosis, mitral valve prolapse. I can see that the patient has left ventricular hypertrophy, and obviously left ventricular function is poor. Sure, I cannot say if this is regional or global, but even, you know, large infarcts, anterior infarcts, can be visible here in this parasternal long axis view, because very frequently you would even see the mid and basal portions of the septum, you know, having a wall motion abnormality. So in this view, my first thought is this must be some form of, you know, reduced left ventricular function, cardiomyopathy, with left ventricular hypertrophy and with an enlarged atrium, obviously also with aortic valve sclerosis, but probably no significant problem on the aortic valve. Okay? The next thing I do is I just enter the color, and I do that both separately across the aortic valve and also across the mitral valve. Mitral valve shows me mild mitral regurgitation. Again, I'm a step further. She does not have a valvular problem. Left ventricular function is not related to a problem of the valve. Obviously, I then perform a short axis view to look at the mitral valve to see aortic valve to see if it's bi or tricuspid, which in reality would not make you know, any change in this patient. The only thought that I have is that if someone is 92 and he has a bicuspid valve, he probably would have stenosis too. So I'm sure that this is yeah, this is basically a tricuspid valve. I just got a question or a comment in from Jeremy, which is a very good comment. I'll just go back to that to show that also to the other users. Yes, Jeremy, you're completely correct. This is a typical myopathic motion of the mitral valve. What does that mean? It means that the mitral valve does not open completely because the flow is fairly low and it does not push open the mitral valve. It's not mitral stenosis. It could open if it would have, you know, a driving force to, but it doesn't, and that's what we call it, myopathic myocardial function. But let me go back now to, or let me go further now to the apical views. The first thing I do is I do a 4-chamber view, and the 4-chamber view is now gives me the rest of the information. I can see the true extent here of the left atrium, okay, the right atrium, the left ventricle and the right ventricle, and at that point I now also have the first information of how longitudinal function this patient is, and I see that, okay, radial is poor, but longitudinal is even worse. It's not moving here, okay? Then I look at the texture of the myocardium, which looks kind of echodense. Yeah, okay, now you might say she has amyloidosis. Could be in an old senile patient. There's senile forms of amyloidosis, okay? And then we see that right ventricular function is also not normal, and that the left atrium is significantly enlarged, and then you usually calculate the volume of the left atrium, in this case 209 milliliters, which is very large. Not the largest I've seen. If you want to see a very large left atrium, I have one posted in one of my newsletters called Guinness Book of Records. Okay, and then I look at the 2-chamber view. Again, global function is reduced. The question is there wall motion abnormality here at the base? And then look at tricuspid valve. Try to find out if how high pulmonary pressure is. In this case, 3.8, which fits to the poor left ventricular function to her symptoms. Okay, I guess I have to speed up a bit because I'm running in late, but I do want to show you one very important last image again. Well, let me show you 2 images because you should see this as well. Then I look at diastolic function. Diastolic function, you can see that she has an E wave, which is higher than the A wave, and she has a small little L wave. And just by seeing this alone, I can tell that filling pressure must be elevated. This cannot be normal function. It cannot be normal because your patient has reduced left ventricular function in the first place. But this by itself is a sign that the patient has elevated filling pressure. And if I do the E to E prime, you measure the E prime value here, you know, fluctuates a bit, I kind of average it, I would get an E to E prime ratio in the range of 25 to 35, which simply means that our thoughts about left ventricular filling pressures were correct and that it is elevated. This is now the strain analysis. I do that because it gives me another feeling for longitudinal function, and we see the typical pattern with a central, almost, you know, trying to compensate area in the apex where we have excessive longitudinal function, but where we have deteriorating function at the base. This is the typical evolution, how left ventricular function starts to deteriorate when we look at it in a longitudinal fashion. Okay, so this fits very nicely to the images we had before, to the 2D images. Just to answer a question that was brought in, if there was an aneurysm of the interatrial septum, let me go back to this image here. Well, in a way, I would not call it really an aneurysm. This is the fossa ovalis here. And what happens is that the pressure in the left atrium is so high that it pushes the fossa ovalis towards the right. We call this, in our terminology, we call this LAP, which means left atrial pressure is elevated. You know, a real aneurysm would probably be, you know, more exaggerated, you know, bulging into the right atrium. Okay, just put this case together. What does this mean? The patient is old. The patient has cardiomyopathy, maybe burned out hypertensive heart disease. We cannot exclude coronary artery disease. Obviously, this might also be the case because the basal inferior septum, as you can see here, and also the basal inferior wall was a bit reduced. The only thing that I was kind of concerned is this region down here, because in some views I had the impression that there might be a thrombus here. We're thinking about performing a TE study in this patient to clarify that. Here, this is the region here. Honestly, I think this is just the left atrium we're cutting tangentially, but you know, I cannot exclude for sure that there's not a mural thrombus here. Otherwise, I guess we'll just try to stabilize the patient. Remember, she's 92, and hope that we can just bring her along with medication.